It is the Anfield Wrap. I'm Neil Atkinson and we are in association with Access Sports Colleges. I'm joined by Neil Jones, by Mo Stewart and by Josh Sexton. But to discuss Access Sport for a second or two, if you go to accessport.ac.uk/TAW, you can see a page there to get more information. Access Sport employ industry-leading and highly qualified staff who are active within the sports industry to develop students aged 16 to 18 and prepare them as effectively as possible for the rigours of the industry. It includes coaches, physio and sports science staff who work at professional academies and teachers who are qualified to a master's level within their respective fields. They use all sorts of technology in order to be able to develop the players and allow them to learn from feedback and improve over a period of time. And the facilities allow the students to benefit from an immersive environment to develop roles and skills that would work within football environments. The programmes aren't delivered in big buildings but in real sports environments and go from there. They try to offer a real sporting experience in order to motivate and challenge learners and have them take the next step, whether it's inside the industry of sport or whether or not it is outside and into more conventional educational paths post 18. accessport.ac.uk/TAW. We're very, very pleased to be partnering with them. We'll be doing more and more across the next few weeks and months. Okay then, I have Josh, I have Mo and I have Neil, as I said a minute or two ago, and we'll talk about Liverpool 0, Chelsea. Neil and Neil Jones, it's very 0-0 and it's very mid-table, and if anything, that was the thing that arguably just sort of most crushed your spirit. It wasn't the same as Brighton away. It wasn't as incompetent as Brighton away. It wasn't as lacking in intensity as Brighton away. It just wasn't a very good game of football.
No, it wasn't. I sort of wrote a piece this morning about, I think back sort of 10 years, 2 years, that would have been the sort of Sky's Super Sunday, wouldn't it? Those two games, Liverpool, Chelsea, Man United, Arsenal, Man United. And it would have sort of been like, wow, this is the big stuff, isn't it? And actually, it was 12:30, and it was 12:30 in everything. That
couldn't have been more 12:30.
It couldn't have been more 12:30. It was freeze, and it was just 9th against 10th. And it was, I saw Jonathan Northcroft in the Times described it as the mid-table millionaires, and I thought that was a pretty good description of it. These sort of tribute acts, if you like, that they know sort of, it will get better at some point, but right now it's just to be endured. And it was for the 1,000th game, a milestone game. A lot was made of Jurgen Klopp reaching that. It was probably one of the less memorable ones of his entire career. Never mind his Liverpool one.
They seem to me, Mo, two teams who were low in collective confidence, and that ebbs and flows a little bit during the game. It felt to me that Liverpool, and maybe this is just because I'm more focused on Liverpool and I wasn't paying as much attention to Chelsea, it seemed to me that Liverpool were a little bit lower in individual confidence. But it felt like two sides who were sort of almost looking at teammates like strangers at times. Both teams doing a bit of that. And then additional to that, again, for both teams, I felt as though there was a really weird, massive legs question second half. Every little bit of it, they didn't have confidence in the fitness, they didn't have confidence in each other, some of them didn't have confidence in themselves. That makes a football match difficult to watch.
It was, and then we didn't even mention the conditions. I wasn't there, but it looked like it was absolutely freezing, and then the wind picked up. But the confidence point is really important. There
was a lot of weather, Mo, and none of it was good.
I got that sense through the TV for sure. But, Josh and I spoke before in the preview before the game about the confidence, and not just confidence in the individual, but confidence in each other to do the jobs that they're supposed to do. And that really played out in the game. I think there were things that you saw they were trying to do. Like, they tried to lift the intensity. They tried to make everyone remember that this is a Liverpool-Chelsea game. But it came with more of a frantic nature. It wasn't necessarily calm and controlled, and therefore it was less successful. So you have 3 or 4 players going in to try and win one ball, and the ball ricochets off one onto another and back to a Chelsea player. Whereas if they were a little bit more calm about it, a little bit more confident, you give him the space to go and win the ball. You stand an appropriate distance away to get a second ball, and then you go from there. But all of those teeny processes have broken down. For Chelsea, I had a little bit more sympathy simply because the manager was asking them to do a different thing, it seemed like, every 10 minutes. So it's going to take a little bit of getting to do with. I don't know whether that influenced Liverpool and maybe Klopp felt like he had to change, or the players themselves felt like they needed to do different things. But where we are within our rehabilitation as a football team, it means that you're going to get ugly games like this. You're going to get days where it's just like, I'm not sure if we're ever going to get back to that.
It felt to me the other driving factor Mo mentions there, Potter's determination to consistently sort of tweak the shape. It felt to me like for both managers there was a real importance of not conceding. I think that both managers felt their side would not be able to withstand the notion of going behind. That would be game over. It did, watching the game, Josh, it looked like a first goal game, and I think that influences some decision making accordingly. Neither manager wants to open up in any marked way, so you end up in this situation where 0-0. Unless there was a moment of individual brilliance, looked on the cards from, say, 65 minutes onwards.
Yeah, and it's something that Graham Potter has obviously been good at throughout his managerial career. But I mean, particularly at Brighton. Brighton were always a side who were hard to beat if they didn't manage to score sort of many goals themselves. Jurgen Klopp has almost had to, I don't want to say learn that on the Liverpool job, because I think that underestimates how good a manager he's been at the other clubs he's been at. And without watching those Mainz teams, I presume at some point they were hard to beat to have done the things that they did. But at Liverpool, Liverpool were pretty easy to score against in the first part of his tenure. They became that relentless winning machine because they became hard to beat, but suddenly Liverpool are sort of easier to beat against. So I think that's the first thing that he has to, I guess, rediscover at Liverpool now, is making them hard to beat. And this in that sense was a sort of positive first step. And it's hard to see it as that because it's ultimately a 0-0 draw, and we've all mentioned there that it was a rather dull game as well. But making Liverpool hard to beat is the first step, I think, towards them going on to be successful again.
There's, first and foremost, whilst it's the first time Jurgen's managed against Graham Potter's Chelsea, it felt to me that if there's one thing Klopp knows, it's firstly that Potter's clever, and secondly that he's very, very good at changing a game from the shape of a game from the bench, and he's got 5 subs to do it with. And I think that feeds into the fact that I think Liverpool's use of the subs, Neil's, really, it's worthy of a conversation whether or not you think it was good or bad. I feel as though it was almost quite bad, but I felt like the manager didn't want to play his own hand because he wanted to see what hand Graham Potter was going to play. And so you've got to remember that when he's sort of going through the game. You've got to bear that in mind. But then simultaneously, the act of only doing 2 individually, when you can only break the game 3 times, I felt he painted himself into a corner a little bit, the manager there. And repeatedly I felt like there was room for a bigger move in both of those 2 substitution periods. And as it was, and then watching legs degrade, especially Bačević and Elliott, it felt to me like you were watching the legs go. Forget the performance, you were watching the legs go. And I feel as though the team could have been given more help from the bench in that context.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I thought 82 minutes for Fabinho and Henderson was odd. I thought there was an argument that I don't want to do it almost instantly. I think you are giving off the wrong signal if you do it instantly. But I thought as soon as Mudryk come on, I thought there was an argument for Alexander-Arnold on in front of Milner or with Milner in front of him, because I thought it was clearly going to be problematic for Liverpool to stop him with Elliott on that side of the pitch and with obviously with Milner at right back. So I did think they could have taken the initiative for it. You could have brought Darwin on at half time. I thought it was a game that, we might go on and talk about Gakpo, but I think there's massive alarm bells ringing already with him and where he fits into this team when everyone's fit or when nobody's fit. But I think there's also, you've got to remember that there's a reason he's left those players out, and I think the statement rings louder if you leave those players on the pitch to do it. Rather than saying, "Sorry, Jordan, I got that wrong. Get on." 10 minutes into the second half, I think that is a statement. He's left out Joel Matip, Henderson, Trent had a minus fitness concern, but I do think that was a little bit played up as well. I think he would have started if he was in better form, and Fabinho as well. So I think there's an element to that. I think there was maybe a little bit of an overreaction to the Wolves game in the sense that it was better, but actually I don't think it was that good. I think Liverpool had 2 shots on target, and I think the expected goals was pretty much in Wolves' favour. So it wasn't a game that Liverpool have they were back at any point in that game. But I think there's a few factors. But I think there was a fear of what Chelsea had in reserve. If you look at their bench, Liverpool had good subs on the bench who were out of form. Chelsea had a new sign coming on who was going to come on with real sort of gusto, if you want to call it, and he did. They had a potential match winner in Aubameyang. They had Chukwuemeka, who's doing really well for them at the moment. So I think the feeling was they probably had a few more in reserve that you could bank on to go and change the game. Liverpool looked like they were just throwing it all on Darwin, really.
And I don't think it was the best use of all of our resources. We're going to talk about who started where at some point, I think. But even taking into account the subs, when you are making the decision to bring on Núñez and go more attacking, I think to bring off Keita for him at that point, as opposed to perhaps maybe a Harvey Elliott, I just think it kind of weakens that argument of what you're trying to do. It weakens your ability to do what it is you're trying to do. And we've spoken a few times on the show over the course of the season about complementary footballers and trying to get players in the team who kind of accentuate the good things rather than kind of mask the bad things. And it doesn't feel like we're doing that. It feels like every step forward we're kind of going backwards on that point. And I don't know whether that's muddled thinking between what we're trying to do and what we're able to do and what Klopp's sending them out to do and then the results he's seen on the pitch. But I think the malaise around the club, the indecision that you see on the pitch, I feel like it's probably starting with him as well because, like Neil said, there was 20 minutes between Mudryk coming on and Trent coming on. And I don't know how fit Trent was or wasn't, but those 20 minutes felt very, very long in the game. And those were 20 minutes where we were hoping to be able to use the initiative we had to win the game.
So I want to do this a little bit differently, Josh. I want to talk about this game in the context of 3 previous games against Chelsea. You had to put up with my writing at the weekend. I want to talk about the League Cup final, FA Cup final and Chelsea home. I want to do Chelsea home 2019 first because what I wrote a little bit about feeling like Liverpool have got the yips or that rhythm's just not quite right there. And what I mean by rhythm is not just the rhythm of playing, though I think that's a thing. Understanding the rhythm of football matches. I think Liverpool have fallen out of the habit of understanding when the games are going to go in peaks and troughs. So I sent you all the stats bomb race chart from the 2018-19 Liverpool-Chelsea game where there's very little in terms of goal mouth action from Liverpool first half or from Chelsea. If you remember rightly, it felt like a really turgid 0-0 at hitting the half-time mark. And then there was an absolute maelstrom after half-time from Liverpool and the 2-0 up by the hour. It's not dissimilar, and I think that this is where I've been frustrated at times with Liverpool this season, Josh. It's not dissimilar. The maelstrom comes immediately after half-time, but Liverpool haven't given themselves the best chance of scoring the goals that they need to score to take the game away from Chelsea. They've got that bit right, but again, understanding the rhythm that this is going to come then, and then they haven't got. It's obviously the obvious example is Nunez, but it's not just Nunez, it's Trent Alexander-Arnold as well. There's 1 or 2 others possibly. They haven't got that idea of this is where it's going to be forced from in a definitive sense at the point at which they do actually whip the performance up into a peak for 15 minutes, which is the complete opposite to 2018-19.
Yeah, I think it's telling really that in that spell, I think it's Konate who the best chance probably falls to within that spell where Liverpool are better, isn't it? So that
Falls
sort of...
to?
if you want to call it that.
5 yards out.
But yeah, like you look at that Liverpool team and you know, I take Neil's point about the Wolves game. The Wolves game wasn't, you know, great in a sort of traditional Liverpool sense, but what the Wolves game showed was a sign of, again, I mentioned it, Liverpool being hard to beat, but there being some sort of semblance of what Liverpool were once about. And I look at that 18-19 and particularly into sort of the early stages of 19-20 Liverpool, and they were really, really hard to beat first and foremost, but then as you say, at one moment they could just flip a switch and completely kill a team. And this Liverpool team at the moment don't look like they'll even create enough chances, or the chances will fall to the right people for them to be able to do that. And I don't know whether that is necessarily a confidence thing. I think the confidence builds into it, but I think there's so much more the manager could be doing in the sort of immediacy to not only limit how much of an impact the confidence has, but to make sure he's got the right lads in and around. Like the Gakpo thing, I don't know if we will go on to it later in the show, but it feels like there's such an issue with him starting that game for me, in that if Darwin is fit enough to be on the bench, then he should have been starting this game and Gakpo should have been nowhere near it. I don't know if the manager's using Liverpool's lack of form as a reason to give Gakpo more time and to sort of get him, I guess, used to the system. But you had a lad up there who was figuring out the system, still sort of figuring out himself and what he looks like as a Liverpool player in a game where, you know, as you say, Liverpool felt their way into it, and then once they were in it, he was, you know, nowhere near any of those chances.
Just look at the team, look at the front six. Yeah, who are you gonna win 1-0 with a goal by in that game?
Who's your fourth most likely scorer?
Yeah, well, who's your second?
Yeah.
Like, seriously, you know, like you've got Milner at right back, you've got Robertson obviously with his hands full at left back, and you know, I don't think he was terrible, Robertson, but he wasn't dominating the game. You've got Gakpo who had a few chances but didn't take them. Harvey Elliott, okay. Stefan Bajcetic, Naby Keita, you know, first league start of the season, first ever Premier League start, 2 players in midfield. So, you know, that 2-0 that you talk about in 2019, the game was taken away by Sadio Mane and Mo Salah in the space of, you know, 15 minutes. Jordan Henderson set up both goals, I think. I think he has.
I think he scores one. Henderson scores, I think.
No, he chips it up for Mane to head in, and then I think he gives a pass for Stella, who bangs one in from miles out. But Bobby Firmino's in the middle of the pitch. Fabinho's there on song. Gini Wijnaldum, I assume, was playing that game. Trent was a right back. So you had players who were gonna deliver big moments. This was a League Cup looking side that Liverpool fielded in the game. To be fair, some of Chelsea's was League Cup-ish as well, but it was one of them that even when you felt like Liverpool had to score them, because you thought if they don't score here, that it is going to just blow itself out.
But there's a control about that 2018-19 team. There's a surety about not only what they're going to do, but what the effect what they do has on the opponents. If you look at that race chart again, the first big spike from Liverpool comes 5 minutes in. So that's the first big chance or semi-big chance. And that affects not only Liverpool to say, okay, we're settling into this game, but it affects Chelsea as well. It's like, okay, this is going to be a game where they're going to start as fast. And you look at the chart there, and Liverpool are able to control it. And then you get to about half an hour where Chelsea have a chance, where Liverpool may be trying to rest in the game. And then, like you say, they have the third quarter period, which is too much for Chelsea. Now, when we're doing those things, we're not as sure about them. Chelsea are thinking about it completely differently. They're not waiting for us to kind of take over. They're waiting for us to do something stupid. And I feel like getting to the point where we didn't do that was almost job one for this Liverpool team, which is kind of where we are now.
For me though, Neil, as part of this, and this is, but Josh has mentioned selection in there as well, likely scorer. For me, this is a long season of not scoring when we should, as Mo's sort of saying. Whilst we have to graft harder to get on top, I can go right the way through the season. I had a little look before. You can make a strong argument in different phases of the game. I hasten to add: Fulham, Palace, Everton, Brighton at home, Forest, Brentford, even Arsenal in the first half. Liverpool at 1-1. Liverpool are the better side at the Emirates for an extended period, and they're not taking advantage of those weaknesses and moments that they found when they're on top. And this is why this does feel like everything being a little bit off around this Liverpool side at the moment, because you can then have a general and looking after the whole rhythm of the match point, which is Mo's point. But even when they manage to get themselves into situations in games where they're not able to capitalise, and then that also then feeds into the fact that Darwin Núñez doesn't start. He also doesn't come on at half time. By the time Darwin Núñez comes on, the moment's gone. The ship sailed, and that's what one of the things that sort of kills me about the game in hindsight.
I fully agree with the points about almost that. Brighton away aside, Brentford maybe. Brentford even falls into that really with the first 20 minutes of the game, and even at 2-1. They've all been there. All those games have been there. They've been so poor, Liverpool generally, but they could have won every single one of the games that they haven't won. Almost. Even you look at United really. You think 1-0 for ages. Liverpool could have found a way back into that game comfortably, just didn't. But I think that has a knock-on effect. So on the one hand, you look at how many teams have come and sort of put the guard up and thought, we'll just wait for sort of, try and get to an hour and stay level in games. That was an accumulation of what Liverpool were doing to teams. Now it's the exact opposite. The accumulation of what Liverpool have been doing to teams is teams will say, well, if we can get through the first 10 minutes, we'll probably get a goal before half-time. If we can get through the first 10 minutes of the second half, we'll probably take over late in the game and we'll go and win it. I think the best example out of all of those games would probably be Leeds, where all of those things happened. I think Liverpool gave them a goal in the first 10 minutes, got back level, and then as the game went on, after the sort of initial start of the second half, you were thinking, Leeds are going to win this, and he did, and I think Jurgen said it himself. And I thought Chelsea were going to win that.
Liverpool played themselves into being less likely, and that's back to the manager's seen enough of these now, and that's where you could have made an argument to have done 3 at half time, and not in a mean way, just in the way this game's currently going. I think you could have done an argument to do Trent, and whether that was move Milner. It wasn't about taking someone off. You could have done an argument to do Núñez. You could have done an argument, in part because of the yellow card, I thought, of Ambacevic, to maybe do Fabinho, and it doesn't do any of them. And this is back to my sort of, for me, I'll come to you first, Neil, and then Mo. For me, this is this idea of sort of grasping the rhythm of the football match and grasping where the football match is. And that just has felt, and as I say, I feel as though this has got worse and worse as the season's wore on. Like, we're further away from grasping that, and the results are almost by the by in a funny way. Like, sometimes they're going for us, sometimes they're going against us. We don't feel as though there's the intelligence to find the ways to be masters of our own destiny at key moments.
Also, but it's also that, you can't trust the players at the moment that you're bringing on. You can say what you're getting with Núñez. He's going to run in behind. He's going to have shots. He's going to cause some sort of trouble to the defence. But you couldn't say with any certainty that Henderson will come on and grab control of the game, or that Fabinho would win more challenges than a Bajcetic on a yellow, or that Trent would come on and handle whoever he's up against. You know, you can't. You don't have that certainty. There was a lot of times a lot of Liverpool's success was based on subs coming on in games and having an impact, whether it was Shaqiri or Origi or, you know, whoever was left out of the midfield, usually Milner or one of Henderson and Wijnaldum. You know, there was a lot of those type of players that you could bank on them. Even, you know, the problem you actually had more so, I think, with Jurgen at times was that you never ever felt like he could take his hand off the wheel occasionally and just say, no, it's not Sadio's day today, or it's not Mo's day today. We're going to go with Divock. It was more that you had so much faith in the players who were on the pitch. Now it's the opposite, where you're thinking, I've got no faith in the players who are on the pitch really to do it, and I'm losing faith in a lot of the subs as well.
The other thing with confidence and faith, Mo, is, and it's been a pattern all the way through the season, I've talked about it on review, the number of times the manager's made a selection where he's tried to look after legs, where he's tried to look after someone's fitness, and then either brought someone on for 30 or 45 minutes. Happened over and over and over again, where it feels as though he's trying to do everything he can to protect the players fitness-wise, but still ends up exposing them fitness-wise. And so you're left as a supporter, and as I say, I'm sure there's sports science reasons, I'm sure there's conversations that could be had, but I find it difficult watching footballers do 30 or 45 and not thinking, couldn't they do the first 30 or 45, and then couldn't they do 55 off the back of that? But also, that's when we can grab control of the game. Can we be stronger when we can grab control of the game? And I think there's still something in the manager where he wants to finish the game as strong as possible in another sense. But I'm left going, but the game's gone, or the game's now in a different place. The game's now not where we hoped it would be, and that's what's really difficult at times with some of these subs and selections.
All of these things and some of the other things we're going to come on to all kind of go into the bracket of recognising where you are in the game and reacting accordingly to it. We used to be great at that. We used to be fantastic at that. A team could come to Anfield and have a formation that we weren't expecting, and it would take us to about half an hour to work it out, and we'd still probably go in 1-0 up at half time. But the ability to do that, the ability to be able to spot what's going on in the moment has gone. I don't know where it's gone, but I feel like that's the thing that needs to come back, because you see it in everything. You see it in all of those decisions you were just talking about. But think about set pieces. Think about all the problems we've had from set pieces, conceding them, not only in this game, but in all across the season. And what is it? We're not reacting quick enough. We're not recognising danger quick enough. We're standing around like statues where opponents are going in on the ball. We were lucky in this game that we were so bad at reacting that Havertz was offside because he reacted so quicker than us. And that, again, is part of this malaise. It's part of this whole paralysis of confidence, of indecision. And it's affecting so many different parts of the game. But the problem is that you find it's so hard to get it back. That's why I think when Klopp talks about it being a teeny step forward, this is where we are. It's baby steps. I think in the general where we are with this team, there's been times this season where we've been like, okay, this is a bit of a blip. But no, this team is broken. Like, whatever you think about what it was before, the reasons for it, this team is broken. It's broken like you've broken your foot. And when you've broken your foot, the first thing you have to do is make sure it stops getting worse before you can make it get better.
It reminds me a bit of the pandemic season, that because that ended okay with 8 games, I think, wasn't it? Or 10, unbeaten in 10.
Yeah.
And he got in there. But there was a couple of games in there that were, there was a lot of games in there that were absolutely dire. Wolves away, I think, was one. Arsenal away, and he ended up winning 3-0. But we were watching it going, oh my God, like this team is awful. And he got the win. So I know that went down like a cup of hot sick. The Jurgen saying it was a little step forward, but he is right. He didn't lose. That's as much as you can say.
2 clean sheets on the bounce.
2 clean sheets on the bounce. Somehow 2 clean sheets on the bounce. But that it does remind me a bit of that period. It would have been March probably in that pandemic season of just don't lose.
That's why I think, as I say before about Potter and what Chelsea had on the bench, Josh, I think that's part of why the manager was maybe a little bit more cautious. I think it's back to the funny thing where this is a game of 8th versus 9th or 9th versus 10th or whatever. But what both managers know is if you're Potter, you know, they've got Mo Salah, they've got Darwin Núñez, they've got Trent Alexander-Arnold, and all it takes is two of those players doing something very good, or one of those players doing something brilliant, and the ball's in the back of the net. Similarly, you've got a situation from our point of view with Chelsea, where they've got Aubameyang, they've got Mudryk, they've got other footballers on the pitch, where all it takes is one of them doing something brilliant, or two of them doing something very good, and the ball's in the back of the net. And I think that feeds the last 15 minutes of the football that's played. I think Liverpool are on top 45 to 60, Chelsea on top sort of 65 to 80. But then I think it becomes this, well, no one wants to do anything here. We don't want anything almost to happen now, because both of those managers need to come away with being able to say, clean sheet, baby step forward, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and maybe that is the biggest confidence thing. I always think back to games against Manchester City at Anfield, and how much respect those two managers and those two teams have shown each other in those games especially. And look, there's been games where Liverpool have managed to sort of blow them wide open, but there's been a couple that have just been really sort of tightly fought contests, and there has been that sort of respect for what each team...
So it's like that, but it's a much lower level.
Yeah. It was respect for what each team has in terms of those weapons. But in this one, I think, and I don't know whether that is just a wider confidence thing, but you mentioned about Klopp's team selection from the start. So often it feels like Klopp is consistently making mistakes in his starting team selection, and then rather than correcting them sort of straight away, like Neil said, there's a few players probably could have and maybe should have brought on at half time there to correct some of those mistakes that he made from the start. He almost tries to get a bit clever with it, and maybe that is a case of he's trying to save the legs for as long as possible before it's almost...
I think it's fitness as well. I think he's so worried about further injuries that he ends up thinking how he's trying to minimize everything he's doing is trying to minimise risk. But my conversation becomes, but there's other risks, and also you're still exposing them to risk when you bring them on anyway.
But I think it's also... I don't even know the mistakes. I think he used to say, I can't pick the wrong team. I don't think he can pick the right team at the moment, because there's so many players who you just can't rely on what you're going to get. So everything looks like a mistake. If he plays Fabinho and Henderson, people say, well, where's Bajcetic? If he brings Bajcetic on, you go, what are you bringing the kid on for in the second half of the game?
And I think Harvey Elliott consistently looks like the biggest victim of that this season. Like the move to... He'd already not played well at left wing, which I think is not on Harvey Elliott. I think that's on the manager and on the coaching staff.
And the way the game went, sometimes it's just hard for you to get impact.
Exactly, and at that point, I think the only positive move you could have done with Harvey Elliott is either to have taken him off or put him onto the right wing and done something different with Salah to get Salah into the game more. To have then put him into midfield again, which has consistently not worked over and over again this season. And when Chelsea then do bring Mudryk on and all of a sudden have so much more threat down the left hand side, it was just baffling.
I want to comment onto that Elliott shift, Josh, because what I actually thought was I thought everyone playing for Liverpool saw it as a bit of a body blow, and that's again I think if he goes to right wing, I think it's different. I think it's absolutely fine. He's had to go at left wing. It's not quite gone as you'd hope, but it seemed to me as though everyone thought, oh God, there's going to be more to do now. Every single Liverpool player had that energy about them all of a sudden, and that is just not fair on the footballer. It's not fair on the footballer who played really well in a different position on Tuesday night. It's not fair on the footballer in this situation, and he's left there again. And there's people around me getting quite irate. There was a lad who was next to me who was loving and could have encouraged Harvey Elliott more at left wing, and it was like when he moved him to right mid, he was a different footballer. Like it was like he'd subbed him. He was so angry and so frustrated with him, and I was just thinking, this is harsh. This is a tough trot, not least because Harvey himself's thinking, oh God, I've got to do this, have I?
Yeah, I feel a bit like a broken record at the moment on Anfield Wrap shows talking about the manager limiting players' weaknesses. But when Liverpool were at their best and they were that well-oiled machine, all the players just limited each other's weaknesses in all their roles. They were all designed to make sure that Trent Alexander-Arnold was never exposed when he was going forward so much. Make sure that Fabinho's lack of legs going backwards wasn't exposed because he had that protection in front of him. The centre half behind him was so front foot. At the moment, it feels like the manager can't move for exposing players' weaknesses. And once again, Bajcetic, as that game went on, he looked like he was tiring more and more. He was riding tackles more and more. That if there's one thing about Bajcetic is that he really gets kicked, and he got kicked all over the place in this game. So what you needed to do as that game wore on, if you were going to keep him on the pitch for longer, if you were going to wait till 82 to sub Fabinho on for him, is make sure the lads around him were protecting him. Not put the one lad who consistently this season, and again, it's not on Elliott as an individual or as a player, it's a system thing, is going to then expose Bajcetic even more, because that honestly, that sort of, I don't know how long the period would have been, but maybe 10 to 15 minutes where it was Elliott next to Bajcetic before Fabinho came on, I've just spent the whole time tearing my hair out, because we've gone from a midfield that looked like it was, that was almost the point of the chess match where Potter and Klopp were able to feel each other out with those two midfields, and suddenly it was like Chelsea could just run through ours and get the ball to Mudryk and try and make something happen.
I'll say it again, why did he take Cater off? It doesn't make any sense. And This is the thing. We get into situations now where you're having to work really hard to try and work out what Klopp's thinking. Because the whole idea, when we saw the team sheet, everybody was really pleased. Everyone was thinking, okay, the midfield get a chance to go again, fair enough. We've got Salah moving to the centre. Elliott played well right, let's see him do it again. And we've got Gakpo out on the left. No. We managed to mess that up in some way and make it harder for all three of them. And maybe you think, well, Klopp's done it to try and get Salah into his prime position and think, okay, well, with all of the other weaknesses, if Salah is Salah, then we can still ride it out. So as much as Elliott is the one taking the brickbats for it, Salah's the one who I'm the most upset with after that game.
My thing on the case in there was there's every chance that's a sports science thing, that he's been told you can't play Naby for more than 60 in this, at which
well,
point
then why did he play him 90 minutes in midweek?
Which, again, it's but this is back to Neil's point about the fact that he can't, in a sense, he can't do right for doing wrong. Because I'm the one who said he shouldn't do this for sports science reasons, and then we're going, well, hang on, what about this?
And Keita wasn't great.
No.
It wasn't a case you took off a midfielder who was dominating the game. But you're right. Like you took off someone who was giving them something to think about in a defensive sense, and you brought it on someone who gave them a sort of green light in an attacking sense.
And I don't know what he saw to make him think that Elliott was going to be able to do that job. And I watched the game again this morning, and I paid quite a bit of attention to him out on the left. And you see it every time he gets the ball, his instinct is to go backwards or sideways. Like, I think it was to the 35th minute, the first time he got the ball and went forward. And again, I don't want to say this as I'm criticising him. I'm just saying because that's not his natural game. It's not his instinct there. There's a period where Thiago wins the ball really close to the halfway line, and there's just open space, and you think, just run, he'll pass it to you, and he just doesn't think.
In my mind's eye, as you were talking, before you even said that, I was thinking about that's very specific.
The crowd reacted to that, didn't they? It was almost like the crowd said, go.
And again, it's like, if he was on the other side, he probably would have. And it's just that little thing. I looked into it. It's the fourth time in his career that he started as left winger.
Yeah.
And he's done 50 games on the right wing. So just give him the best chance to do his job.
Yeah, there's an element that one. It was interesting in terms of, because it also felt like, lads, we played for the space that we've just created. We've actually done the hard part here. Now the easy part is that it's a straightforward pass and it's a straightforward run. We've done the hard bit finally, and it's in. And that this is back to my sort of things not being off. Like, I think simultaneously at the minute, Neil, it feels like everything's off massively. Yeah. But I actually think things are actually off in small margins. But because everything's off in small margins, the manager's not at where you want him to be. You know, there's individual players who are off. There's the collective feels. Everything's just a little bit off, which therefore means everything exponentially feels off massively.
Yeah, I mean, I said it for a while during Liverpool's peak that it always used to amaze me that they never ever switched Salah and Mane in games, and had Salah having on his favourite side, getting to the byline, and Mane doing the same. Elliott won't do that anyway. Whatever side he's on, he won't do that. But what you do, especially is, I mean, it's not his fault. He's a one-footed player. But there's only one or two passes he can play. You can either go back to Robertson or try and play a square one into midfield, and that's really easy to play against, isn't it? If you know that from the word go. At least if he's on the other side, he opens up. He can play a diagonal. He can slip one down the line. Reverse pass. He can play one in field and get a 1-2. Those options just aren't there for him. And what that meant was that Robertson thinks, I don't know, don't fancy really sort of bombing on beyond there because
where's it going to come?
We're gone, and he can't find me anyway. Really, unless it's perfectly on his left foot and the angle's there. He's not going to find me with a clip one over the top with his right foot. So why would they go? I mean, Gakpo was feeling himself into the game, and fair play, to him. He's got to look after number one in this situation. He's got to find his way in. And Salah was Salah. When you lose an individual battle against Marc Cucurella as a defensive player, you've had a bad game, and he had a terrible game.
Cucurella played him well last season twice.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what I was interested about the selection.
But he is. I mean, you talk about him.
He's no confidence at all. Yeah.
He phones it in defensively. You can see that he doesn't want to defend. You can see that he doesn't want someone to be up against him. And Liverpool never exploited that at one stage, really. I
want to talk about the other two games, Josh, that I mentioned before, as sort of go onto this League Cup and FA Cup. The standard's so short of what was less than 12 months ago from both sides, and it's intriguing because the two extremes. So I want to try and find almost the commonalities in a sense. One's a club of chaos off the pitch, the other's a club of supposed calm off the pitch, and yet we've ended up with the same results. For me, the marked issue here is the inconsistency of shape and inconsistency of selection in both sides. That people knowing their jobs, knowing where they are, and knowing what the team's going to be, has hit both of them. And that, you know, and the other thing that I want to cite is an ESPN piece by Ryan O'Hanlon that I'll quote from in a minute. But that also both clubs have played an unbelievable amount of football.
Yeah, and that's the sort of tough thing that I guess you have to contend with now, especially if you are going to go deep into those competitions, into the domestic cup competitions. It comes back to a sort of squad building thing almost, doesn't it? And Liverpool last season had the squad where, you know, they effectively cruised to both of those domestic finals by being able to start so many of those lads in reserve. And it comes back to what Neil said before about having trust in those lads in reserve. Like every time Minamino and Divock Origi came on, every time they started in those League Cup or FA Cup games, you felt they were going to score. And that almost then bled into the Premier League, where every time they came on in Premier League games, you're like, there's a genuinely good chance here that one of these lads is going to score, because that was the sort of confidence they almost set for themselves. And you see at the weekend, it got to a point where the manager, you know, he's consistently not giving himself moves this season, whether that is, you know, him protecting the legs. It got to the point where Curtis Jones was the most, you know, positive substitution you can make, and he's been in that position a couple of times. I think Brentford was another one where Curtis Jones becomes the most positive change that you can make, and that's a you know, a real and sort of live, genuine issue for this Liverpool side is, you know, how many moves they've got from the bench. You look at those, you know, both of those domestic cup finals, and I think Lukaku comes off the bench for Chelsea in one of them and has a goal disallowed. There's so much sort of in reserve for both sides. So many moves they can both make. So many chances, high quality chances that both of them create. And the weekend's game is the complete opposite of that. There's no high quality chances really created by either. I mean, you could maybe claim a couple of those Mudryk ones at the end that sort of hit the side.
Doing that himself.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a ball sort of played over the top, and he manages to get there with his sort of pace and directness. It feels like the complete counter to those.
The Ryan O'Hanlon piece that I mentioned, it's on ESPN. It's exceptionally difficult to find, to the point that Fuad had to take the job off me this morning, and then it took him so long to find it. He stood up with excitement when he managed to. So I think if you were to Google it and go for Soccer Insider explaining Liverpool-Chelsea issues in ESPN and Ryan O'Hanlon, you might find it, but there's no guarantees. I'll quote from it, and Ryan, you might want to have a think about the SEO, mate. He says within there this. He talked about some other stuff. He says, but a simpler explanation might be that both teams are running on fumes. Over the past 2 years, Chelsea have played 122 competitive games, more than any other side in Europe. Liverpool are third with 117. And since the start of last season, Liverpool lead the way with 92, Chelsea with 90, and then there's Manchester City on 87, who haven't quite hit the heights of previous seasons, followed by West Ham on 85, the only Premier League team who might be having a more disappointing season than Liverpool or Chelsea. The other two English sides with 80 plus competitive matches on the ledger since the start of last season are Leicester City, who were 2 points clear of the relegation zone, and Tottenham, who've got a worse goal difference than Liverpool despite having played 2 more matches. He goes on to sort of say, you know, it might be working in the opposite direction too. He talks up Arsenal, 17 points ahead of a pre-season projection, played 71 matches since the start of last season. Both Liverpool and Chelsea have basically played an extra half season of matches over the same period. Newcastle have played 64 since the start of the 21-22 season. Newcastle and Arsenal, the former have 10 players who've played at least 75% of the mean league minutes, Arsenal, and the latter have 11, Newcastle, over 75% of league minutes. Liverpool and Chelsea, just 5 for Liverpool and 3 for Chelsea, have broken the 75% mark. Soccer players, he says here, I think it's an American piece, soccer players typically get injured playing more games, and when you're playing more games, you're more likely to get injured. But there is, I mean, within that, you know, we have to talk a little bit about solutions, you know, and we can move on to that. And one of those things is perhaps get different players, but then the consistency of those players playing with each other in a sweet spot and knowing each other's roles and knowing where games are, that's an issue as well. That's part of the Chelsea thing. That's another reason why the number of players they've ended up with is another reason for that. Those numbers, though, I think are actually staggering. It's hard to entirely contextualise them. The number of games Liverpool have played since the start of last season is frankly absolutely mad, and no wonder me and Neil Jones are shattered.
I mean, yeah, of course, you guys are representing the wider fan base and, of course, the team themselves. But it is the cost of success and the cost of constant success in Liverpool's case, as opposed to maybe Chelsea, who have had a little bit more up and down time. And then you compare it to teams like Arsenal and Newcastle, who are in different parts of the cycle and who maybe in 2 years' time will be facing these exact same problems. But what it is these are more things to add to what the problems have already been caused by ourselves. And maybe these are the stressor points that caused the break that I talked about before. But when it comes to finding solutions, the interesting thing about Liverpool and Chelsea's comparison is that we are apparently going about it in complete opposite directions. I mean, if you think about, they've brought in, I think it's 14 new players since the start of the season. And everyone knows what we've done. So you look at it and you think, well, okay, there's one way of trying to do it and there's another way of trying to do it. And where we stand at the moment, halfway through the season, neither has been clearly more successful than the other. So that tells you that the either is a catch-all solution. There's more to it than that. And also, going back to my broken analogy, you can't rush it. When you've broken your foot, you need to be in a cast. You literally cannot run before you can walk. And there's an element of that in terms of how Klopp is trying to approach this, in terms of, okay, we can't necessarily be what we are before. Let's just make sure that when we have a corner, we're not getting counter-attacked off. And that didn't happen against Chelsea. None of our corners turned into a Chelsea shot.
Yeah.
And it's like, we
put that on a flag.
but that's just what, if you're in a rehab for a broken foot, you've got 100 days ahead of you. One day you have to say, okay, this is my goal for today, and I did it. And I think this is exactly the same with this football team. The problem is that we might not have enough time to do that because there's all these other teams doing these other things. And so you find yourself in a situation where you desperately want to rush that process, but maybe you just can't.
Yeah, I want to counter what Mo said there about the cost of success, because I think there's, Leicester and West Ham would be the two teams within that sort of bracket who are also suffering. Who you'd argue it's not a success thing. It's Jurgen Klopp has almost bored himself and the media who go to his press conferences to tears, moaning about the amount of games that footballers have to play. It's interesting you mentioned about it being written by an American, because there's exactly the exact same conversation going on in the NBA at the moment, where Steve Kerr, the Golden State Warriors coach, came out last week before a game, which is unprecedented, and said, I'm basically going to rest all my good players for this game. And he said, I'm advocating for a shorter season because these athletes are being run into the ground, and the same thing is happening at this level. Is that it's not just the cost of success. If a Leicester or a West Ham, we look at loads of these mid-table or even relegation scrapping Premier League sides and go, oh, why do they not start their best 11s in cup competitions? Why do the cup competitions mean nothing to any of these football clubs anymore? Well, the reason they do is because they're playing so many games of football now. They're all asked to play so many games of football. All these lads are being consistently run into the ground, and that shows that if you do want to go for a sort of deeper run in the cup competition, if you are a West Ham who end up on a sort of romantic Europa League run, it's only going to cost you somewhere down the line. And Liverpool, showed that simultaneously you can have a big squad, and having a big squad is unsustainable by the fact that they go, all the way in all four competitions to the last game in the two big ones. They have this massive squad, and then over the summer, despite loads of those lads getting to play games, Chamberlain, I think, doesn't play at all from March, but is one of the midfielders who you look at his appearances, and he actually plays loads. He plays over 30 times in that sort of before March period. It shows that having a big squad is still unsustainable, even when you are in all those cup competitions. So managers and players are now at an impossible point in sort of all sports, including the American sports, where it doesn't matter how big your squad is, you're still not going to be able to use it to the extent that you're going to be able to keep players happy. And there's too many games of football, so you're going to consistently get players injured. You're going to consistently get managers trying to rest players and sort of making the mistakes that we're talking about Klopp making, and ad infinitum, until one of the authorities gets involved and says, maybe running these lads into the ground a bit, actually.
That is all true, but kind of what I meant regarding the cost of success is the change in terms of what you were used to as a team and what you're now being asked to do. So, for example, Leicester, they aren't used to being in Europe in back-to-back seasons. They're in the Europa League, twice?
They've had 3 years consecutive Europe, Europa League Europe as well.
And obviously, what the mode that they're in terms of they've often been forced or chosen to sell their best player and regenerate. And the problem with that is that you can't always guarantee the regeneration is going to work. With West Ham, obviously, they've now tried to kind of maintain the success. They did try hard relatively for them in terms of trying to bring in the players to keep someone like Declan Rice around. Hasn't really worked out for them. They've kind of put all the chips on Skamaka, and then Skamaka's gone out injured. And you start to see the problems they've had. It's almost like every time they think that they've solved that problem, something happens to that solution. And so they're back to the same problem. And again, all of those things Josh mentioned are true and are going to affect everybody. But I think in those cases, they've been exacerbated by the fact that they're having to deal with so much that they're not used to dealing with.
Good result for West Ham Saturday, though. There is, also, Josh, thanks for bringing the obscure sports into the conversation.
And simultaneously as well, going pure American with that.
Yeah, got a full hit.
Yeah, I don't think he's actually, asking stuff for us anymore. I think he's maybe appealing to certain other people out there.
There is on it where it ends up, Neil. It was interesting. The manager around the signing of Gakpo was all but saying, it felt like a bit like, not like he'd lost the argument, but saying, you might need 25 of these now. Like, literally, that might now be the direction of travel. But even then, you've got to be able to buy 25 of them, and you've got to be able to pay 25 of them on a regular basis. And, I think, and as part of that, I think you need to have Champions League football. It's not actually been a bad weekend for Liverpool in terms of other results in that. We've got, whether we like it or not, it is Chelsea at home. We've gained a point on United, and we've stayed same with Newcastle. We'll see what happens with Tottenham coming up. It is going to be the baby step stuff. He's got to get a team together for Brighton. If they are going to do anything in the transfer market, this is a good week for it. It just looks increasingly like they're not, but now is the time, because they don't play another league game now for a fortnight. They then don't play another league game until the 13th of February. If they can manage not to draw against Brighton, and we all know they're going to draw against Brighton, but if they can manage not to draw against Brighton, it means that they won't have a game. They basically play weekend Monday in there as well. That's time to work on stuff. I feel a little bit like Liverpool are playing for time. I feel a little bit like that with this 0-0 at the weekend. I feel a little bit like Liverpool, firstly, getting a couple of the attacking lads back, but also, secondly, time to work on stuff, time to be on the training ground, time to try to get something back into people's bones. I feel like playing for time is something Liverpool are about, and that's not necessarily fun.
No, possibly just time out of the limelight a little bit, time out of the daily debate about Liverpool's problems, You have more of those when you play 3 games in a week, don't you? You have more press conferences. You have far more discussion about it, and I don't think it'd be a bad thing at all. To they are going to draw the Brighton, aren't they? They absolutely. Just thinking about that thing.
You can just imagine Klopp cursing the press conference as well. 2 more of those.
Yeah, absolutely. But
doing another thing, he's like at the point he's taking Alisson off.
Yeah, there's no one on. It's a strange move. But yeah, John Achterberg getting ready. But it really is sort of. I mean, listen, I'm fully into the thing of that they do need to do something before the window closes. The longer it goes on, the less likely it looks. But Liverpool have been quite good at that in recent years, haven't they? No, we're not doing anything. Yeah, there's a player from Preston available. Yeah, we'll have him. Okay, yeah. We'll take him. Luis Diaz, obviously, even Arthur in the summer was one that, no, we're not going to sign a midfielder.
I like it when people mention him.
Yeah.
He's like a gun on the stage in the first act of a theatre play. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's going to come in at some point. Oh, of course, yeah.
This is Anfield tweeted a news article they'd written about him the other day, which was like apparently there's a Brazilian club who want him. It could be a workhorse situation, and I was like, that's just not being reported by another journalist. Liverpool might be about to lose a midfielder this window, and no one's talking about it.
Honestly, I've had press conferences with Jurgen where you'll say any team lose Jurgen, any injuries, and he'll say, well, Mo's got a knock and Fabio's got a knock, and he'll just say okay, Gordon, and you think, okay, Gordon, I forgot about him. He doesn't mention Arthur now. He just just goes, yeah, so we can get Lewis back and Diogo and who else is injured.
Adam Morgan's nursing something. Conor Randall's not quite ready.
Peter Kravitz has been a bit under the weather this week. But it is easy to forget, isn't it? Sometimes, I mean, he might have been useful for Brighton in the cup or Wolves in the cup. It would be nice just to see him.
Check in on him.
But yeah, the point is that Liverpool they might leak out a little bit, and they're not particularly leaking it out, but they might sort of the message might come back and say, no, I think we're done for the window. I mean, I think Jurgen said it the day before the Newcastle game, and after the Newcastle game they signed Arthur, so there is scope for it to change. But I think the worry probably is that how do you just fix it with one sign? How do you actually just sort of change the whole thing unless it's Bellingham, or someone of that equivalent? I think you might find that a new signing a la Gakpo just ends up with the same issues that Liverpool have had.
That's part of my issue with it, though, is that you can't fix it all with one signing. You're right, but you can make it a bit better. with one signing, and you can make it so you get to the end of the season and it's a little bit better still. So then when you do these things that we are apparently setting up for the summer, then it means you haven't got to go from 0 to 100. It means you've got to go from 15 to 100, which is still a long way, but not quite as far as 0 to 100.
It's 15 less.
Exactly. and
Won't go that far.
and yeah, I mean, we're in a situation where there is no perfect solution, but there are things that we can do that make things better. And they might not all be big and they might not all seem significant, but it's like you were saying with all the little things that are going wrong. If we can start stringing together little things that go right, then we can start trying to turn this boat around.
Let's try by Mason Mount. I've really enjoyed that coming through. Like they might have a look at it. It feels plausible in a really weird way, and that Chelsea are going to have to do something at some point. Maybe we just ring Chelsea up and say, "Can we have Mason Mount now and not mess about?" And
He played well for Liverpool on Saturday, didn't he? I didn't know he was on the pitch until he went off. I was typed in Mount.
I know. It's that could work in our favour.
I do think he'd suit Liverpool. I do think he is. If you could get the best of Mason Mount, I think he would fit Liverpool
really well.
going
I think
forward, definitely.
Could quite easily slot him very nicely into midfield. Seems to have a brain on his shoulders. I'm very pro Mason Mount.
Get his mate Declan in while we're at it as well.
Sorry,
get his mate Declan in as well.
I think we need. I mean, I'm on the verge of making a really strong argument that we should loan Darwin Núñez to Bournemouth. To be honest with you, Mo, for all their ambitions over the course of the rest of this campaign, I want Declan staying at West Ham for the rest of it. We'll take no chances on that score. All right, that's been the Anfield Wrap. Download the app and all those little bits and pieces. The obvious sorts of stuff by now, and if anything does break, we'll be absolutely all over it as quickly as humanly possible. But thank you very much to Neil, to Mo, to Josh, for Sam for producing the pictures, Andy for producing the noises. 0-0,